Good day, everyone. Just giving it a few seconds while people join. I can see the numbers creeping up, um, and we should be ready to go in a few seconds. And I think everyone is now in. So welcome everyone to this concluding session, or the concluding day certainly, of UN Behavioral Science Week. This panel, as you can see from your screen, is on using behavioral science and technology as tools to address sexual harassment. My name is Shagato Datta, and I will be introducing the other panelists in a moment. Before we do that, I'd like to turn it over to Mary McLennan from the UN Innovation Network to say a few words as we come to the close of this week. Mary, over to you.
Thank you for that, Shagato. And good to speak to you all today in the last session of Behavioral Science Week. So thank you for joining us over the last 5 days of many discussions with 38 entities, 15 sessions from health, climate, gender, peace and security, and much more. I think there's a lot we can continue to discuss throughout the year and before Behavioral Science Week 2025. So with that, we're going to put in the chat the YouTube playlist to all of the recordings, including this one, which will be up there later today. So if you want to catch up on sessions that maybe you haven't seen, you can do those. And also what we wanted to feature in this last session is a video of the Deputy Secretary General to close out Behavioral Science Week of 2024. So if you stop screen sharing, Rosa Maria, we can then share the video of this Deputy Secretary General. Great, thank you.
Colleagues and partners, as we conclude the 6th UN Behavioral Science Week, I want to express my sincere gratitude for your active participation and engagement. Our world faces immense and complex challenges, from conflict and climate change to chronic poverty and rising inequalities. Supporting peace and protecting human rights, delivering aid and advancing sustainable development, and upholding international law have rarely been more important. Our Sustainable Development Goals for a more equitable, resilient and sustainable future are woefully off track. Mobilizing financing and innovative solutions to accelerate SDG progress is going to be critical. Making the UN fully fit for purpose to tackle the 21st century challenges starts with our expertise, our skills and capacities to respond and deliver. The Secretary General and the senior UN leadership are committed to building next-generation capabilities in data, innovation, digital and strategic foresight, and behavioral science, grounded in what will be a forward-thinking culture across the UN system. We call this vision UN 2.0, and this week has been a vital part of building it. Colleagues, behavioral science is crucial for UN 2.0. It helps us better design frameworks, decision-making tools, strategic plans, and improve programs. It allows us to identify barriers, understand incentives, and design impactful actions for SDG progress. Much of our work involves addressing behavioral change in health, climate action, gender norms, and information integrity. Understanding how people make decisions and how policy influences behavior will be critical. And this is where change begins. The UN family is already using behavioral science for greater impact, addressing sustainable transitions and partnering with stakeholders. This week, we've heard from teams across 38 UN organizations that are tackling hate speech, financial access, digital services, gender norms, health challenges, and so much more. Member states are also embedding behavioral science into their work. From Brasilia to London, New Delhi to Ottawa, colleagues in member states and the UN are applying behavioral science to improve public policy in health, environment, finance, education, and transport. As we face multiple global crises, the potential impact of new research and insights for our work is immense. Let's embrace a mindset that integrates science, empathy, and action to unlock the full potential of behavioral science for better policy making for people on our planet. Colleagues, the week marks a significant step forward, and rest assured the UN system is your trusted partner in this journey. As we move forward, I encourage all of you to continue collaborating and sharing your insights. Together we can harness the power of behavioural science to drive meaningful change and achieve our shared goals. Let's make this week a milestone in our journey towards a better future for all. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Shigata. And now back over to you for the session.
Thank you, Rosa Maria. If you could have the slides up again, we can jump right in. Let's give it a couple of seconds while we get it. Here we are. Okay, so welcome everyone to this concluding session of Behavioral Science Week. Very much in keeping with those inspiring words from the Deputy Secretary General, we are going to be looking at a pretty complex issue, but one where, as you'll see, there has been some really interesting work done already to leverage behavioral science to make things better. And so just to give you a sense of what we'll be doing today, we're at the introductions phase right now. I just wanted to add a couple of pointers for people. The Q&A is where we would love you to share any questions that you have. Panelists will have the option of either addressing them in the Q&A box itself as we carry on with the presentations, but also we'll have the opportunity to have some of them which might be of broader relevance addressed towards the end of our session today. And then I will give you a little bit of an overview of some work that's been done on sexual abuse reporting mechanisms, sexual harassment reporting mechanisms at IFAD using behavioral science. And then we'll go on to short presentations from each of our panelists, who I'll introduce in a moment. And then we'll have time for discussions and Q&A. Next slide, please. So let me briefly introduce our panelists. I myself am, as I mentioned, my name is Shigata Datta. You can see that on the screen. I've been working with IFAD on a few projects, but I'm basically a behavioral scientist by training. We have Maine Astonitas, Senior Portfolio Advisor for Latin America and the Caribbean at IFAD, and she is the technical lead of the project that actually looks at applying behavioral science to the reporting mechanisms for sexual abuse and sexual harassment within IFAD. And so she will be talking to us in more detail about that work. We are also joined by Marina Limos from the World Food Programme. And she is the lawyer and the technical lead on prevention and response to sexual harassment at WFP. And so we'll be hearing from her about some of the work that's been going on there that she's been involved with. And finally, Alexandra Okpala from the Women X Collective, the innovation unit at the UNFPA. And she coordinates the setup of the Women X Collective, a global center to advance innovation, research, and investment in women's health. And she's supported related work in a number of previous roles at UNFPA and elsewhere in the UN system. So we're very fortunate to have her with us today. So with that, let's continue with our presentations. I've already mentioned this, so we can jump to the next slide. Okay, we're going to do, this is the final session, so hopefully we can, get you all fired up a little bit with a simple activity. I will, in a second, ask Rosa Maria to scroll through these next few slides very, very quickly. And because you're all not able to actually speak, I would just urge you to, you don't need to unmute or anything like that. I think you can't. But what you will do is you'll see a shape and a color in a particular color on the screen. And please just quickly say out loud the color that you see. So obviously on the screen right now, we see the color red. And Rosa Maria, if we could just quickly scroll through the next few slides. Okay, so I don't know how many of you stumbled here and how many of you felt that you said the word blue when really you were meant to be saying red, which is, after all, the color that you see on screen. But this is a canonical sort of test in behavioral science. This is a version of a Stroop test. And what it shows us is that our automatic system of thinking is often dominant over our more deliberative thinking. And these are the sorts of insights about the fundamentals of human decision-making that behavioral science uses to try and have impact on really important solutions. And we'll see how this is done in a moment. Next slide. So, these are a couple of ways in which this might affect what happens. And you can, I think, already begin to see how this might be relevant to something like the reporting mechanisms for sexual harassment within an organization. So one thing that comes out of our system of automatic thinking being very dominant is that we can get flummoxed by too many options. And so if you think about any reporting mechanisms, perhaps there are multiple ways in which a person can actually report something, and that can actually, while it's well intended, can end up actually leading to confusion or leading to indecision. And similarly, anything that we design is probably going to have some sorts of hassles and minor inconveniences. And we might think these don't matter, but in fact, they turn out to matter quite a bit. Even the fact that people have to sort of climb up a few steps to use the foot overbridge in this picture means that they wind up actually doing exactly what the overbridge was designed to prevent, which is crossing the road in an unsafe manner. Next slide. And so with all of this in mind, IFAD worked with behavioral scientists from the Busara Center for Behavioral Economics to identify the behavioral obstacles that might deter individuals within IFAD from reporting incidents of sexual harassment and sexual exploitation and abuse effectively. Next slide. And part of what was done as part of this work, and you will hear more about the outcomes of this work from Maine in a few moments, was that the team was really able to look carefully at the entire pathway for reporting an SEA or SH situation within existing IFAD channels. So if you think about these ideas about what are the hassles, what are the things that can derail reporting, this was an important way to begin to analyze all of that. Next slide. So the good part first. The good part was that as part of this work, the team was able to actually get a sense for how prevalent the behaviors that we are trying to prevent here or to report here were. And the good thing in some ways was that the level of sexual harassment in the workplace was not very high. It was relatively low, both with respect to people reporting what had happened to themselves or what they had experienced and in relation to what they'd heard from other people. Next slide. And there was also a fairly high level of awareness about the existing channels of reporting within the IFAD system, with one caveat, which is that field staff and contractors were relatively less aware of these channels. And another thing that really sort of jumped out, and this is where the behavioral aspects become really clear, is that people didn't have much contact with the reporting system after the when they're hired, they were trained about all of these things, they were made aware of them, so they knew about them, but they didn't have much contact with them afterwards. And so this begins to raise questions about things like, are these channels actually salient? Because you need to know about them at the time that you need to use them. They need to be top of mind. Are these procedures clear? Are they actually something that people can readily access mentally when they need to? Next slide. And there was not necessarily the best perceptions about the reporting process itself. People were not very confident that the offender would be disciplined if they did make a report. So this already begins to tell us about some of the perceptual and similar bottlenecks that might actually deter or reduce the level of reporting, even if channels were known, even if channels are available. And one important thing that emerged from this was that the expectations of confidentiality were relatively low. So people were not confident that things would be kept confidential while nevertheless moving ahead. Next slide. And these were some key features. And one of the things that the team was able to do was to say, what do you think would actually help? And these were some of the things that emerged from that analysis, that people really wanted to know what to expect from the process. They really wanted to be confident about the consequences to offenders, right? And about the kind of assistance and support was offered. And a little less important, but still important, was the possibility of reporting anonymously. And these were some of the things that emerged from the analysis. Next slide. And specifically, when people were asked about desired features of a mobile reporting app for these purposes, then they were able to really guide the team about some of the important things. And I think the most important thing here was that they wanted the complaint to be traceable in terms of its progress through the system. So they didn't want to be in limbo once they'd reported something with no way of knowing what was really going on. Next slide. So some important takeaways here. We've really talked about this, that while there was good knowledge of mechanisms and protocols, there were some challenges around the perceptions and expectations regarding the process and lack of information about consequences and progress with the reporting process. Next slide. And I won't go over these in detail, but just to say that this allowed the team to uncover some important bottlenecks to reporting. And I'll just highlight a couple here: fear of retaliation, fear of being transferred, and not trusting whether the case will be credible. So what sort of evidence is going to be needed? And a lot of perceptions that negatively affect reporting in terms of what the resolution is likely to be like, what sort of resolution there's likely to be. And lack of clarity, being unsure about how much evidence is actually needed to pursue a case. Next slide. And finally, I think one thing to highlight is that anonymity makes it easier to initiate a reporting process. But if there's no way to track confidentially, that actually makes it difficult for people to report because they don't have a way of seeing what happened to their complaint. And so there is a sort of distinction between anonymity and confidentiality, which is going to be important in how IFAD moves ahead. Next slide. So I will now hand it over to Maine to talk to us about how IFAD actually did act on some of these findings. Maine, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Shaugato, for introducing us to the results of this important research. For IFAD, it was key to understand preferences, so reporting processes could be improved, fulfilling the needs and expectations of the potential users of these services. One of the experiences I want to tell you about today is the improvement of the incident reporting process. Shaugato drew attention to usability issues. For example, the process was quite lengthy and perceived as cumbersome. The report had to be completed in a single section and took the person over 9 clicks to navigate 3 different tiers on the website to finally be directed to download a PDF form. This could be filled in digitally or manually and could then be submitted digitally or in person. On average, this process required about 25 minutes to complete, during which the person was requested to provide detailed written information. While there is no universal standard across UN entities or within the public or private sectors to define an adequate timeframe for reporting, the longer the time required to complete a task, the more likely it is to be abandoned. As you know, all our online interactions leave behind an indelible digital trace, and people are becoming more conscious that every digital transaction leaves a footprint. For example, you can be identified by the email number on your mobile device by downloading or submitting the digital form, thus compromising anonymity. Other issues identified were the lack of awareness among personnel regarding the standard operating procedures, as they may not have fully read or remember all the documentation they signed when joining the organization. Colleagues who participated in qualitative interviews were unfamiliar with the step taken by the ethics office as a result of the submission of a report, as well as the timeline for an inspector response and how to trace what happened after an allegation was reported. Now, let me show you one of the changes of our ethics office recently implemented. Our ethics office has been quite active and recently improved the reporting process. One of the reporting channels is accessible by QR code, which more easily takes the person to an anonymous complaint form that is written in 3 out of the 4 IFAD official languages. IFAD recognizes multilingualism as an integral component of diversity in our strategy on diversity, equity, and inclusion. This simplified process has considerably reduced the number of steps to report incidents, and as a result, the number of anonymous reports has increased. Next, please. To improve workplace culture and complement efforts from our ethics office, we propose a new channel to report sexual harassment, which we have named the Top Secret Headline. This mobile app is an initiative of IFAD staff from the Latin America region that was presented to the UN Culture Change Innovation Challenge in 2022. This was a highly competitive UN-wide initiative which chose 10 proposals to participate in the Innovation Bootcamp, which was led by the World Food Programme Innovation Accelerator. We work alongside like-minded colleagues and mentors on workshops to refine our proposal and bring it to a minimum viable product. We have to acknowledge that we live in different times, so we need a tool that is amenable to what people today in the digital era are accustomed as users. Today, you can almost do everything from your phone, from purchases to accessing directions. People now resist printing or physically signing a PDF. They may not want to go to an office to report sexual harassment, as people have transitioned to digital media and communications. Having a mobile app would allow victims and bystanders to choose another channel for reporting aside from the email, WhatsApp, phone line, and forms that IFAD currently offers. If we're going to focus on a victim-centered approach, we have to create all the facilities for people to have become more familiar with these more convenient channels. We are going to work with users to co-create the modules of the app. As Shaugato mentioned, one of the findings of the behavioral study undertaking showed that the traceability of the reports was a preferred feature. We are also considering working on training modules using gamification and providing the geolocation of service providers. IFAD aspires to be a decentralized institution, so it is important for victims to access psychosocial services as soon as possible when this type of incidents occur. The Top Secret Helpline app will offer end-to-end encryption to guarantee that communications that go through the app are not accessible to third parties. Victims and bystanders could confidentially and anonymously connect directly with the ethics office, who has the mandate to receive sexual harassment complaints. Finally, the app will offer traceability of the reporting process, so those who have submitted a report can know at what stage of the investigation their case is. Well, thank you for the chance of presenting you with this initiative, and over to Alexandra.
Thank you.
Alexandra, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here and to be able to share the UNFPA experience. So what you see here on the slide is a very condensed UNFPA experience in addressing sexual harassment, with particular focus on addressing reporting barriers. To start with some broader context, as you may know, in 2017, there was a global push to better address sexual harassment following the Me Too movement. And at the UN as well, the Secretary General made zero tolerance for sexual harassment his top priority. In line with those efforts at UNFPA, we approached it in a structured way to really first put in place a robust system to tackle sexual harassment, addressing key structural barriers. And this first included setting up a global organizational structure with a dedicated PSCAH unit coordinating the organization-wide efforts. This was followed by the adoption of a new sexual harassment policy. And this policy was very important, and the improvements that it introduced really provided agency to survivors. It enabled anonymous reporting, it removed time limitations for reporting, and it provided options to pursue both formal and informal resolution mechanisms. So the adoption of the new policy was accompanied by a global awareness-raising efforts to ensure all staff are closely familiarized and equipped to apply the policy in practice. So now that we had a robust framework in place, we aimed to better understand and address the behavioral barriers associated with reporting sexual harassment. So we took an evidence-based approach by systematically analyzing reporting data, the trends, and staff feedback through the various surveys and other engagements that we had with staff. And what we saw was a steady increase in reporting on an annual basis. And we also noticed improved awareness of policies, rights, and reporting procedures, indicating that our efforts had impact. We also saw, on the other hand, clear behavioral barriers that were still there and needed to be addressed. The main barrier, lack of trust in reporting and response mechanism, and that due to fear of retaliation, perceptions and expectations about reporting processes and ensuing investigations, as well as lack of support. So in response, we implemented several concrete measures, and I'll only have the time to highlight two. The first one, in 2022, we established an informal integrity group, is what it's called, and it consists of 6 offices that are focused on internal accountability and staff welfare matters. So this included our investigations office, our ethics office, our human resources office, our PSEAH, Protection from Sexual Exploitation, Abuse and Sexual Harassment office, legal office, and the Ombuds office. So what this group provided, on one hand, was a regular platform for these 6 offices to exchange and collaborate more closely. And on the other hand, through proactive regular staff engagement and communications, we had webinars and we developed a platform. The group really addressed concerns, questions, provide resources to enhance transparency and build trust. In a more targeted approach to better meet the specific needs of survivors of sexual harassment, we established the role of the Sexual Misconduct Support Focal Point. This role, and just briefly, provides a one-stop entry point for survivors to get access to information, to guidance, to basic emotional support, psychological first aid, and referrals to more comprehensive support services. Lastly, for our approach, building trust is really a continuous effort, as we all know. It requires all of us to be part of the solution, and recognizing that staff are best positioned to address sexual harassment in their local context. This year, in 2024, we are launching an ideation challenge. The aim of the challenge is to empower staff to develop innovative, locally relevant, and staff-driven solutions. Successful proposals will receive support and funding with a knowledge exchange platform to share successful strategies across the organization. So to conclude this slide, by continuously evolving our approach, we really try to ensure a relevant, informed approach to eliminating sexual harassment and the barriers. Next slide, please. So here I wanted to briefly present an example of an external innovative tech-powered solution that we have supported at UNFPA. So for anyone looking to use technology as a tool, this example provides some really good insight. UNFPA's innovation unit leverages innovation to accelerate our mandate. We run global innovation challenges to support women-led social enterprises with equity-free grants and capacity building to position their innovations to scale. And among our challenge, and I was the coordinator of this challenge in 2022. So among our challenge winners was SafeYou, that's the name of the solution, from Armenia. SafeYou is a multi-stakeholder platform that tackles gender-based violence. It provides GBV, gender-based violence survivors, with really helpful emergency functions, and that includes a help button that automatically starts recording and sends alert to 7 pre-selected contacts. It also provides, the application itself provides free access to professionals, safe spaces for peer dialogue, and information where to seek help. In parallel, the app also collects non-personally identifiable data for live monitoring and reporting to governments, strengthening the prevention and informing policymaking. They currently have over 35,000 users, and with the support from the UNFPA Challenge, they have expanded to 2 additional countries. They're now present in 6. Recently, I believe just the beginning of this month, they launched also in Romania and have plans to expand to the United States underway. So I'll conclude with just a final thought linked to this innovative solution, SafeYou. One reason that I believe why SafeYou has been so successful is their strong, highly adaptable, user-centric approach. In each new context that they expand, in a new country where they expand, they adapt the app together with local partners. Localizing the app requires adapting its interface and functionality depending on the different contexts, cultures, needs, and they continue to improve their user journey. They do this through research and interventions with women, local women from different backgrounds, and I would really encourage you to explore it because their experience is very valuable for you. Thank you.
And over to Marina now.
Thank you, Salgato, and thank you, Meine and Rosa Maria and the UN Innovation Network for making this interesting discussion happen today. So I'll be sharing some of WFP's experience on addressing sexual harassment with the help of behavioral science and technology. A few years ago, WFP also commissioned an external review, and the findings of that review, which included an all-staff survey, were not so different from the one that Alexandra talked about in IFAD, in UNFPA, and also mine and Salgato covered about IFAD. These findings revealed that we needed to improve the trust of colleagues in the system. They needed to believe that WFP would take action and be protected if they spoke up. Another interesting finding was that employees reported a prevalence of more subtle forms of sexual harassment, such as suggestive sexual comments or jokes. And this seemed to indicate that the expectations of behavior at work were perhaps not clearly set, which was sending a message that perhaps this sort of behavior borderline would be acceptable. So in order to plan effective actions in response to these findings, we also hired an organizational psychologist, and he conducted interviews with stakeholders from different regions and contexts of operations to better understand the gaps in the specific needs. And we understood, in line with the theory of open systems thinking, that our organizations are strongly influenced by its environments, right? And WFP, as all of your organizations or most of your organizations, have such a vast range of environments in which we operate, with not only different cultures, but also different laws. So we had to really be inclusive, right? We had to ensure that we were sensitive about the different cultures and used simple and clear language, as well as multiple languages, but also that we thought about the organization as a whole and its general values, which apply to all regardless of where they are. And to achieve that meaningful behavioral change, we had to avoid polarization. We had to open the dialogue with empathy. So next slide, please. One of our main projects as a result of this was the revision of our abusive conduct policy, which covers sexual harassment. And based on the identified gaps on trust and clarity, the main goals behind this revision was to make that policy more accessible. And we did that by clarifying and streamlining reporting avenues. I know that Salgato covered that as well, right? So from around 7 reporting avenues, we went down to 3. And we included also visual cues and flow charts to just make it more clearly understood what to do, right? Where should you go? We also made the policy shorter from nearly 30 pages down to 12. And we tried to make it as practical as possible with very clear responsibilities for each function, so that people knew also what to do, or at least it was clearer for them. And another important goal, especially on trust, was to bring out the victim-centered approach a bit more clearly. And one of the things we did here was to encourage early reporting. And we were building on the concept of inappropriate conduct here. That means that based on that identified gap on clarity, we didn't want colleagues to think that they had to understand if that conduct constituted sexual harassment or not, right? So what we wanted is for them to speak up as early as possible and let the technical colleagues us advise, because that's our job. So the revision of the policy, of course, would not be enough to drive trust and actual behavioral change. We had to broadly communicate that as well. And this is where some important resources came in. One of those was the Speak Up Toolkit. So this is an interactive PDF, a short document with images, links to animated videos, very easily accessible from the phone, from the computer, and very practical. If we could go to the next slide. This is just the table of contents of the Speak Up toolkit, and it follows also the structure of the policy in a way, right? So we start to when to speak up, so that we talk about definitions and examples. On the side, you can see the sexual harassment page with examples and important facts about sexual harassment. Then we go to how to speak up, covering the process and what, you know, these different functions can do. And we finish with the roles that each colleague have to play depending on the situation you are in, right? If you have a problem, if you're being affected, if you are aware of a problem, so how can you support? Or maybe if you are the problem, right? So if someone spoke up against you, so we also wanted to cover that. If you could go to the next slide. So another initiative that we also developed was this online modules. And behavioral science played a very important role here, because especially when it comes to transgression at work, as technical practitioners, we tend to be very direct, right? And which this may not be so effective. So we wanted to design these modules in a way that would encourage individuals to take action in a more empowered way, rather than telling them off and communicating that something is wrong with them. So next slide, please. The first one is called, How Can I Promote a Respectful and Inclusive Workplace for My Team, Embracing Psychological Safety. So in the interviews that we conducted, the lack of psychological safety kept coming up. For those who are not familiar with the term, psychological safety is that shared belief that psychological safety is the belief that you will not be punished for speaking up with ideas, with questions, with concerns or mistakes, right? So based on this, we developed this online module, and later also we have targeted live sessions for managers to drive really to encourage the psychological safety in teams. And this includes practical steps on how to gain self-awareness about your own actions and the micro messages behind what you're saying. It encourages us to stay curious and listen actively, sharing vulnerabilities, and micro-affirm your conversations as well, asking open questions, right? So it relates to both prevention and response to sexual harassment, right? Because if you have a psychologically safe team, you're more prone also to speak up. The second module is about bystander intervention, right? So how can I become an active bystander? You are all probably familiar with the concept of the bystander effect, when we see something wrong happen, but we do not act because we're waiting for someone else to do, or because we're afraid, or for, you know, so many reasons. And this happens on a daily basis. And we understood also from a behavioral science perspective that our awareness raising should not be top down. You must not do this, but this bystander training is particularly interesting and helpful in that sense, because it also empowers colleagues to take action when they see someone doing something wrong. So we're not telling colleagues that they should not do something, but we are asking them to be allies, to be champions. And by, you know, having this more active role, you're of course also internalizing the fact that you should not do that. Right? So we include them and we meet them as they are, as empowered individuals. And again, this related to deterrence and early response, and gave colleagues very practical steps on how to speak up when hearing or seeing something that was wrong in the workplace. And the last online module was about behavioral change. What should I do if someone spoke up about me? How do I change my behavior through self-awareness? So especially as we were now encouraging early reporting before matters escalated and became even more difficult to address, and we were also encouraging colleagues to approach each other if they felt comfortable. We needed also to equip the colleagues who were spoken up against or to be able to really listen, to exercise self-awareness so that they could change their behavior. So we all know how a negative or constructive feedback can trigger an emotional response, that famous fight or flight, or our sense of self. So through this module, we really wanted to encourage that culture of feedback, of open dialogue, of self-assessment, and also to seek support. And last but not least, if we can move to the next slide, We also had a range of live speak-up sessions targeting all employees and also specific functions such as HR, ombuds, and also managers. These sessions were envisioned really to bring all of this together and to create a space for dialogue. We wanted to allow people to really speak, share their concerns, complain, and we wanted to listen to them with empathy. The content also had to make sense in different work environments. So before each session, which were targeted also by different countries, even for the all employees, we would meet the key stakeholders in that country, in that region, to understand their needs, the maturity level, so that we could also meet them where they are and tailor the content to them. In the sessions, we also included a very interesting discussion around what's considered appropriate and inappropriate, so that it became clearer to the colleagues what behavior was expected from them, even if that would slightly vary from country to country, right, from context to context. So that, thank you so much for the opportunity of sharing those. I'll hand over back to you, Salgato.
Thank you so much, all the panelists, for that really, I think, wonderful view into how different parts of the UN system have been using behavioral science, using technology to tackle this really important issue. I'm going to pose maybe a couple of questions to the panelists to get the discussion part of this started. Then we have lots and lots of questions in the Q&A, which we'll try to address as many of them as possible. So if I could just maybe request the panelists to come back on camera and begin with this question. We heard three different perspectives here about different parts of the UN system working to address this important and difficult topic. And I saw a lot of resonance between the different approaches. I would love for you all to reflect a little bit on what are ways in which different parts of the UN system can really learn from each other, can collaborate, can take the learnings from what's been done in one part to address the challenges they're facing. So in whichever order you would like to go.
Thank you, Salgato. I think I'm going to start. I think panels like this are a very good opportunity to share information across different institutions, but also this has allowed us to know each other, to know what we are doing, because we don't want to reinvent the wheel. When we started, I think everyone started in their own agency, and we say, okay, there's so many things going on out there. Why do we have to start from scratch? So I think this is one opportunity for dialogue, and I hope we continue this dialogue. I know we are going to continue this dialogue in the future because there's so much we can do and learn from each other.
Shall I go next? Keep the same order. Thank you. So I think everything that Meine said, I fully agree. And let's continue this dialogue. It's really important. And I just want to commend also colleagues from IFAD and WFP for all the efforts that you are making in this very important area. I want to take the opportunity to draw your attention to a very important area that we haven't touched on. Somewhat we have, but not fully. But I think that it's also crucial to ensure that any tech-powered solutions are safe and ethical. And there is an important, and here the thought behind sharing among the UN entities, there's an important body of work that a team from UNFPA colleagues are working on technology-facilitated gender-based violence. So I'll only highlight a few points, but really the core of it is to ensure that any technological solutions that we use are safe and ethical. And that means safety by design. Integrating safety features from the very start, including secure reporting mechanisms, anonymity, data protections through encryptions, login protocols, etc. Survivors and people-centered design. Keeping survivors and those most at risk at the center of all these efforts. The next one also, transparent data handling. implementing clear and enforced data handling policies, being very transparent with your users about how you are using the data. Participatory development, engaging survivors and relevant stakeholders in all stages of the design process. And lastly, compliance with data protection laws. I think that's also very important. I just encourage everyone that is looking into using or developing a tech-powered solution to look at their body of work, and I'm happy to share it. Of course, it's all publicly available, and I'm happy to share it also on the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Alessandra and Meine. I fully agree with you. That's so important, Alexandra. It would be great if you could share that. And yes, I echo your words that, you know, even in the preparation for the discussion today, we learned so much from each other. We have such similar problems, right, and challenges in our own organizations, and it's so important that we, you know, we avoid this, like, why are we all working separately when, you know, in the end we may come up with similar solutions, and we could be complementing more each other. I think that's where a lot of the you know, UN-wide networks come in, right? I think, for instance, we're very active in the CEB Task Force on Sexual Harassment, which is now the executive group, where we also try to socialize our materials among each other, right? All of the entities of the CEB entities, which include, like, most UN entities, are participants in that group too. So that's really important. I also had seen, and based on your question, Salgado, I also had seen a question in the chat which was someone asking, how about the, like, one-stop shop, right? One reporting line only. And during our discussions as well, this is something that came up, we discussed, right? And I mentioned that at WFP we reduced from 7 to 3. Ideally, I fully agree, 1 is best. We did what we could at the time, but it was interesting also to learn from UNFPA and IFAD how they managed to do that, like, to a one-stop shop as well.
Thank you so much, everyone, for those reflections. And maybe just a quick round of everyone maybe reflecting on some of the challenges, and some of this has come up in the Q&A as well. People asking about, for example, like, you know, when you have a tech-based solution, does that create additional hurdles, for instance? You know, how do you address that? But any, you know, what are some of the challenges you faced in taking this approach towards addressing the issue?
Thanks, Shogato. I think I'm going to start first clarifying that the Top Secret Helpline is an application that we have yet to build. When we started this in 2022, we had to do to mobilize funding for this application, and we just finished the first part, which was the behavioral study that you presented. I don't know if it was clear for all colleagues, but I see some questions coming from there. So basically, what we thought is about being inclusive for all different levels of literacy. I'm not as digital as a digital literate as I should be, maybe as my neighbor or as my coworker. And if you are going to facilitate the reporting through an app, everything has to be put to a minimum common denominator. We still have to identify through A/B testing which are these minimum common denominators for all the potential users of the services. I also saw a question regarding aren't we making things more easier? Participants are going to be reporting cases that may not be really cases, right? So this is another thing that we have to make sure and put some logs, and also warn staff that when they are going to report, and if they report and the case is not really a case, I mean, if a report is false, it can be considered as misconduct, right? So there are so many things that we have in our lengthy procedures or in our documents that we have to make it more user-friendly, more a little bit more down to earth for the regular user can understand, see what are the advantages of reporting through this means, whether they want to do it through another form. The idea is to provide choices and more options to the people that we serve. And why there was another question saying that we are not going to solve everything with an app, of course. There's a lot of work that we need to do, and this behavioral study that we did, we found really useful because there were so many recommendations, like for the low, the medium, and the long term, what we can do, what we can tackle, and this is part of the role and the mandate of the ethics office in IFAD that I'm sure they are eager to move forward with.
Thank you. So I think, Meine, you've outlined it in much detail, so I won't go into too many more details to discuss the challenges. I just wanted to say, I think, one thing. So for me, having the experience from both working at the protection from sexual exploitation and sexual harassment unit, and then on the other side, the innovation unit, I feel like I have this interesting perspective. And I would just very briefly say that I think appetite and having leadership to really innovate in this regard, looking at the behavioral science and behavioral barriers and how we can address them differently. I mean, I think we all like to quote the UN Secretary General's definition of innovation, which is doing things differently and doing different things. And it really, you know, it's on point. And I think something that I was trying to convey in my presentation was how at UNFPA we have evolved and we are trying to do things differently. And this ideation challenge that we are launching this year is really a great example of a bottom-up approach, you know, to really engage staff and give them the opportunity to address sexual harassment as they are really best placed to address it in their local context. Thank you.
And I think from my side, I think some of the challenges also relate to one of the questions in the chat, which is how do you ensure that there is a causal link, right, between the increased number of reportings and the reduction of incidents? And I think this speaks to the tracking of success, right? How can we ensure? How do we know that it's working? How do we know that all of these initiatives are effective? And this is extremely difficult when we're talking about behavior and misconduct, right? I mean, I think the only thing I can think about now is the use of surveys, right? But still, there is this system-wide survey fatigue as well. Like, how many surveys can we submit? They also all have to be always the same so that we track the same things. So more number of reports could it mean that there's more incidents, or probably not, right? I mean, I think we all can, in a way, because we work with it, we know that there's still another reporting happening in the system, but again, you know, it's always a bit tricky to measure it in practice.
Thank you, all of you. I know we have a lot of questions, and some of them, thanks so much for addressing them already, whether in the chat or in your responses. Maybe picking up on a couple of themes that I see in some of the questions. So one is, if any of you could speak to how to sort of balance the need for greater reporting, which is, you know, after something has happened, and prevention, and sort of looking at the perpetrator side. I think, Marina, you already had some reflections on that in the way that you've gone about this work, but, you know, if you'd like to expand on that, or if others would like to come in, I think that would be really interesting. Would anyone like to come in on the question of how to sort of the prevention versus reporting issue? How do we kind of tackle that using behavioral science?
So, Shaukato, I think we need to be really distinguish three different ways, right? We work the work on prevention is different. Of course, we have to use behavioral science on the barriers that we have identified to make make the behaviors and the misconduct more understandable for users, because we work in international organizations, which may be misconduct for me in Latin America, may not be misconduct for someone in Eastern Europe or in Asia Pacific, or things change, things are nuanced. So we need to work on that and how the behavior can change, and try to remove barriers as much as possible, and increase the motivation for reporting. Because what I focus a lot on reporting is not only because of the Top Secret Helpline initiative, but also because sometimes, as you mentioned in one of your first slides, there's the perception that there may be so many cases, but on the reality, there are not so many cases. It's more like, I don't know, a little bit of gossip here, a little bit of extra noise that people are mentioned, and when you don't know the whole story, we are people, right? And things can get a little bit escalated or out of proportion, maybe, and then the perception of people would change. So I think behavioral approaches would be used a lot on tackling the prevention part of the problem, because we already know that working on prevention pays off. Like, this is the first way where the first, let's say, this is the entry point where we should be working. Then the next step would be response. Response, yes, I can respond to an incident, but once the incident has been reported, if the incident has not been reported, how can response be started, right? So that's why I'm placing also a lot of emphasis on reporting, because we think that making things easier for reporting and would benefit the victims who are going through these situations.
Yeah, and if I can also complement, right, I think that a lot of the initiatives that I covered on the WFP side were focused even more on prevention. But again, I agree that they go hand in hand. But, when we're talking about really opening the dialogue, making it inclusive, it's because we really want to engage with colleagues, right? Because oftentimes, we go and we do an awareness raising in a more conservative country, and we can be met with way more resistance, and they're going to say, why, what you're saying, it's very normal. That's what we do. That's my culture. And so on, right? So we really have to arrive there with open minds and try to really engage and learn from them, listen to them, but also make sure that we're clear on the boundaries, right? On what's the behavior that is expected of everyone everywhere, right? And then on the prevention side, so as I mentioned, the bystander training is an important one. The psychological safety, training leaders, training managers to ensure that their team is really comfortable, safe to speak up, to share their ideas. So we're also tackling prevention there. Right, and also an early reporting. So it's both. As I mentioned, also in our toolkit, and we also have a module focused on alleged perpetrators, right? So we also want to engage with the colleagues, because it's not always that it's such a serious offense that the only solution is a dismissal, right? I mean, with sexual harassment, it could be most cases, but not always, right? And that's why we're also encouraging the early reporting. If it's only inappropriate, if it's only a one-time comment that you made, it doesn't mean it's going to be investigated and you're going to go through a disciplinary process. But that's why we have informal channels as well, right? Because if that colleague is made aware of how that one-off comment impacted another person, maybe he will already learn and change his behavior from that on, right? And then we'll avoid things from escalating. And I think that's also a way to achieve prevention and awareness raising throughout.
Thank you, Marina. Yeah, I was hoping you would sort of remind people that there's quite a bit about the perpetrators in the guidelines and in the tools that you talked about. It was really interesting. I think we're almost out of time. I just wonder if anybody has any final closing thoughts. And there was a question that I thought was interesting, which is, which said we do so many trainings. How do we make are these trainings kind of behaviorally involved? How do we make them more behaviorally informed? And if anybody has any quick thoughts on that, that would be great for us to close this out.
Well, I'm not, as part of the role that I have in Latin America, I'm not in charge of delivering training, but on delivering training, what I find it has been useful is always knowing the audience of the training, because the audience of the training would define what are the needs. And sometimes we tend to design the trainings thinking about what are the aspects that we need to cover that of course are important, because we want to give an overview of all the issues, how the issues can be tackled or not. Behaviorally, I think there's a lot of opportunities to understand why, for example, you go to a training and sometimes people are quite shy, they don't speak up. So one of the things that we were considering in the training is, for example, you go to a training and then you give the people the forms to report. Why do you give the people the forms to report? Because so they have it handy when they need it, or they can file it in their own cabinet, or at least they know, they are aware, they have seen it with their own eyes, and they know what is going to be required at each time of reporting, right? So this is one quick example. And I think there are so many questions regarding the use of behavioral science and crimes and UN peacekeeping. I wish I could answer them all. The idea for us would be to work from a victim-centered approach, trying to make things easier for people. And of course, having a central entry point for all complaints would be something that we can aspire, but then we have to also be careful, because each of the UN agencies have different lines for reporting each case. So for example, we have a line for environmental and social issues. We have another line for ethics-related issues. We have another line for anti-corruption issues. So for me, the idea would be to make the process more simple for all people is always going to be the better. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Alexandra, did you want to come in?
Oh yes, just very quickly. I just wanted, well, Meine, you nailed it again. So I really agree with everything that you said. I just wanted to quickly add, in terms of like training that you mentioned, Salgato. I think one issue that we have challenge is lack of funding to really do in-person training. I mean, we have UNFPA, 4,000 personnel across 150 countries and territories. And yes, we have many trainings. Yes, we connect with staff over webinars very regularly. And COVID has brought some improvements in that regard, that everyone has, really started thinking about. We have to improve online communications and how we connect and train and build capacities. But research still shows that training on this type of topic requires an in-person approach. It is very important. It is role modeling, skill building. Yeah, so I'll conclude there. I know we're over time. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It has been wonderful. Let's continue the conversation. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much to the panelists, especially for Meine and team for bringing this panel together. I think it's been wonderful to just see that with such a complex issue, breaking it down into steps, looking at each part of the process and really doing what you can to simplify, to facilitate action, whether through trainings, whether through procedures, forms, channels, hopefully can lead to an improvement in the situation. So thank you all very much. I'll close us out here. It's been a pleasure and it's been fascinating. And I certainly absolutely hope that this can continue. I think Marina wanted to say something.
Just really briefly, because I see that some colleagues asked for the materials. So I would encourage colleagues to write to us, so we can leave our emails. And if you're from a different agency and you're interested in some of the materials or engage in further conversation, I think I speak to all of us to say that we're open to to reply and share anything that you may have found helpful.
Fantastic. Thank you all so very much. And yeah, I hope this conversation continues across the agencies, across the entire system. So thank you.